Jesus. We kicked off a brand new sermon series last week entitled The Ultimate Destination, and the focus of this series is on heaven. And I'm excited about this series because, in my opinion, there's nothing you can think about that's more exciting and beneficial right now than thinking about the life to come. And yet, so many of us hardly ever, if ever, think about heaven. I want to share with you again a quote from Philip Yancey that I shared last week. Yancey said this: "Although most believe in an afterlife, no one much talks about it. Christians believe we will spend eternity in a splendid place called heaven. Isn't it a little bizarre that we simply ignore heaven as if it doesn't matter?" Now, Paul, in his letter to the church at Colossae, reminds us this is not the way it should be. Heaven, Paul says, is where our mind should be set. Colossians chapter 3, verse 2 and 3. "Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things, for you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God." Heaven does matter, and it matters that our mind is set on heaven. And one of the best ways to get heaven on our mind is to get to the words of the Apostle Paul into our hearts. And for this reason, last week I challenged us as a group to memorize Colossians chapter 3 and verse 2 and 3. Did anybody take me up on that challenge this week? Just show of hands real quick. Hesitant. Linda, I'm not going to call on you. You can raise it high. Scott got it. Nick did. He's already shared it with me. Okay, working on it. Can we try to say it together this morning? Yeah? All right, here we go. "Set your mind on things above, not on earthly things, for you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God." All right, let's keep going. We'll get that down, right? Congratulations to those who are well on your way. But let's get in our mind so it gets in our heart, so it gets in our mind, and we think more about heaven. Now, I suspect there are a few of you here this morning who would be very content to spend the rest of your days in your favorite lazy boy in front of your high-definition TV. But most people I know would love to see more of this amazing world that we live in. And for those of you that describes, I want to share with you a great app that I found a few years ago. It's called Bucket Dream. And the neat thing about this app is it helps you create a bucket list of places that you would love to visit. And one of the really cool features of the app is it makes recommendations of locations based upon your preferred preferences of activities or what you like to do. For instance, if you are a foodie, it will recommend to you that you ought to take a food tour in Italy. So if you're really into theater, then New York City and London are must-do destinations, as is Fenway Park in Boston and Wrigley in Chicago if you are a baseball fan. Now, for those of you who love nature, most likely it's going to recommend to you that you need to go scuba diving on the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, or maybe it will say you need to hike through Banff National Park in Canada. For those of you who just thoroughly enjoy standing in long lines and spending gobs of money and being around overstimulated children, it will recommend any of the Disney theme parks. That's where you need to go. Now, in all seriousness, this is typically how we choose our dream destinations, isn't it? It's all about the what. What can I see? What can I do? What can I eat? And if that meets my preferences, that's where I want to be. That's where I want to go. So it may surprise you just a little bit this morning to learn that a place like Yakima, Washington was on the list of must-see places for anyone. I mean, Seattle makes sense. Seattle's a beautiful place. Seattle has Pike's Marketplace, it has the Space Needle, it has the original Starbucks. Great place to have on your list. Yakima, Washington, not so much. I suppose if you're really into apple trees, you might put Yakima, Washington on that list, but that's about as exciting as it gets. And yet, for a couple of years, Yakima was near the top of my places that I wanted to visit. Why? Here's why. I wasn't thinking about what. I was thinking about who. At the time, Yakima was where my sister and her family lived. And so with each year that passed without me getting to see my sister, my desire to visit one of the armpit locations of the great Northwest grew stronger and stronger. That's where I wanted to be. Why do I share that with you? Here's why. Because so often when we talk about heaven, when we think about heaven, we think about the what. What will heaven be like? What will we do there? What will I be like? And it is really exciting to think about all the whats. But what is not what makes heaven heaven. It is the who. And it is the who of heaven that John points us to in Revelations, chapter 21 and verse 1 through 3. John says this, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Look, God's dwelling is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God.'" Heaven is heaven because God is there. And make no mistakes, that is what makes it the ultimate destination. Yeah, now, yes, we're going to see some amazing things and do some amazing things and eat some amazing things in heaven. But none of that would matter if God was not there. In fact, if God was not there, do you know what heaven would be? Heaven would be hell. But the good news is God is there. And when we arrive there, we will have unrestricted access to him. And this is the exciting news that John reveals to us in Revelation chapter 21 and verse 22. He says, "I did not see a temple in the city, because the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb," speaking of Jesus, "are its temple." Do you remember how the temple worked? Inside of the temple, there was a room known as the Holy of Holies where the presence of God dwelt. Now, who was allowed to enter into the Holy of Holies? Could any Joe, Mary, or Simeon just drop by for a visit in the Holy of Holies? Absolutely not. The only person who could enter into the Holy of Holies was the high priest. The high priest only had access to God once a year. Now, everybody else was restricted to another area based on their status, based on their gender, based on their ethnicity. And so if you're a priest, but you're not the high priest, you could get close, but you couldn't get in. And for those Jewish men who were not priests, well, they were restricted to an area a little bit further away. And then to those Jewish women, they were restricted a little bit further away. And if you were a Gentile like most of us, then you had to stay somewhere out near the parking lot, basically. That is as close as you could get to the presence of God. But this is not how heaven will be. Folks, in heaven, we will be in God's presence. John says God himself will be with them. And let me assure you that in heaven, it's not going to be like going to a stadium to see your favorite band perform. You're not going to spend the rest of eternity looking at an image of God on a big screen because your seats are in the nosebleed section. But rather, you're going to have an all-access pass to hang with God. Listen to this amazing news shared by John in Revelation chapter 22 and verse 3 and 4. He says, "The throne of God and of the Lamb will be in the city, and his servants will serve him. They will see his face, and his name will be on their foreheads." Do you remember what Moses desired more than anything else? More than he desired seeing justice rain down on the Egyptians, more than he desired entering into the land flowing with milk and honey, he desired what? He desired to see God face to face. He desired to see his full and complete glory. But God would not allow it. In fact, God spoke these words to Moses in Exodus chapter 33 and verse 20. But he said, "You cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live." What Moses and every other human has not been able to experience here, we will experience there. We will see God face to face. And no longer will any of his glory be kept from us. Can you imagine what that's going to be like? Can you begin to imagine how you're going to feel that moment when you see God face to face? Have you ever had the opportunity to see someone face to face, a person that you always wanted to see face to face, but never in your wildest dreams did you think you'd have the opportunity to meet that person? I had that experience. In 1997, I stepped off a train in Warsaw, Poland, just a short distance from a theater where Bruce Springsteen was performing. And the reason I knew Springsteen was performing at that particular theater is because the night before, I'd been one of the thousands in the audience seeing him perform. And it was fantastic being in the audience, seeing his image up on that big screen because I couldn't get real close. But on this night, I decided I was going to see if I could get close to one of my all-time favorite performing artists. And so I did something very uncharacteristic of me. I tend to be cautious by nature, but I joined in with another small group of fans, and we made our way past a lax Polish security guard, and we made our way to a van that was parked by an exit on the backside of that theater. We had no idea if we were in the right place, but sure enough, when those doors finally opened, Springsteen walked out, and he headed straight to us. And when he got within earshot, a guy from Norway that I had been visiting with, he shouted out, "Bruce, you've got an Okie here," and he pointed at me. I was living in Oklahoma at the time. And so Springsteen, who's now close enough for me to touch, he looks right in my eyes and he says, "Oklahoma," and he reaches out and he grabs a program out of my hand and he signs it. Listen, I froze. I think I wet myself just a little bit, but I could barely get "thank you" out. And immediately Springsteen's gathered up by his handlers, he's put in a van, and they drive off into the night. And I only got to spend just a few moments with the boss. But I tell you what, it was amazing. As I walked towards my hotel that night, I don't think my feet touched the ground. I was walking on air. For the next few hours, the next few days, that is all I could think about. It is all I could talk about. And if you ever want to see that autograph, you come over to my house. I will show you the framed autograph with the pictures and the ticket stubs and everything. I love it. And I share that with you because I think the way I felt that night is how we're going to feel when we come face to face with God, multiplied by 1,000,000,000,000%. And here's the cool thing about it. God's not going to get into a van and drive off. We're just going to have the rest of eternity to just be with him, to enjoy his company. And we'll never grow bored. You know, being with Bruce is cool. But I have a feeling that if I was given the opportunity to hang with Springsteen for a month, 24/7, eventually I'd lose a little bit of interest. I mean, it would be great. I'm sure I'd be enthralled for the first several days or weeks as we talked about his music, and he shared some of his road experiences and life experiences, but eventually Springsteen would want to talk about politics, and I'd glaze over at that point because I don't really like to talk about politics, and I'd just lose a little bit of interest, and I promise you, he would grow bored with me a whole lot sooner. And for some of you, you might assume that after the first, 10 million years of eternity or so, that you'll start to grow bored being in the presence of God because you'll know all there is to know about him. But I want to assure you this morning, you'll just be scratching the surface. Just scratching the surface. Hanging with God will be unendingly interesting. Now, some of you find that hard to believe because you sort of imagine God being kind of like this guy. I promise you, heaven is not going to be a big classroom where we are bored by lectures that God gives. It won't be like that at all. There's no one more captivating than God. It's the most entertaining storyteller that you'll ever meet. the most insightful teacher, the most engaging conversationalist, and the most charismatic presence. Grow bored with God, there's no possible way. At the same time, this may be hard to get your mind around, but he's not going to grow bored with you either. Love what Randy Alcorn writes. He says this: if you're a Christian, you'll be with him, God, for eternity and enjoy endless fascinating conversations and experiences. Incredibly, he'll also enjoy your company and mine. After all, he paid the ultimate price just so he could have us over to his place for eternity. One of the ways that we will experience God is in the second form of the Trinity, Jesus Christ. God being one being, but three forms or three natures, three persons, means that we will see God the Father face to face, but at the same time come face to face with God the Son. And Scott McKnight, the theologian, he articulates it this way. He says, in the center of the biblical vision of heaven is God. But if you keep looking at the God of heaven, you'll notice that the images morph. On the throne in heaven is God. On the throne in heaven is the Lamb. On the throne in heaven is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Heaven is designed for people who love Jesus and long to be with him forever and ever. What do we know about the resurrected Jesus that we will interact with in heaven? Well, we know that he's not a spirit or ghost-like. We know that he has a body. It's a glorified body, but it's still a body. We know this because after the resurrection, he appeared to the disciples, and here's how they describe your experience, or John does in John chapter 20 and verse 26. A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with him. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." And then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here, see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side." And from that we know, yes, Jesus has a resurrected body. It's a glorified body. It can do things that our earthly bodies cannot do, but it's still a body. It is solid. It is substance. It is something we can see. It is something that we can touch. It's a body that can run and jump. It is a body that can eat and drink, and that means we can do things with Jesus in heaven that requires a body. It means that we can share a meal with Jesus someday. We can go on a hike. We can play catch. We can embrace with a hug. We can read a book. We can go on a horse ride. We can fist bump. But it really isn't so much about the what that we're going to be able to do with Jesus as it is what we're going to share. See, we cannot even begin to imagine the depth of relationship we will one day share with Jesus, who is God in heaven. And because you will share this intimate relationship with God in heaven, there you will finally feel completely satisfied. The Rolling Stones nailed it when they sang, "I can't get no satisfaction." And that's true, isn't it? There are people in this world who are more satisfied than others, but none of us are completely satisfied, are we? At least not deep down, or not. There's still this longing in us. And that longing is there because the day we were conceived to this present day, there's just been this part of us that has longed to experience more of God. And it's that desire to be with God, to know more of God, to have more of God. It really is behind so many of the decisions that we make in life. It drives so many of the things that we do. I think this is the point that G.K. Jesterson was making when he said this, and don't get thrown by this quote. Please listen carefully in the context, and I think what he's communicating. But he says this: every man who knocks on the door of a brothel is looking for God. Now, it's kind of startling to some people, but what he's saying is this. He's saying everything that we do, like our worst efforts, when we pursue hedonistic desires, what you're really looking for, whether you recognize it or not, is you're looking for a deeper connection with God. And even behind your best desires, when you get involved in all kinds of religious activity and you're doing all these good things, why are you doing it? You want this deeper, more intimate connection with God. And because we're not with him face to face yet, we don't have it completely. We don't feel completely satisfied. But the day is coming. The day is coming when your thirst and your hunger for God will be completely satisfied. When you're in his presence, when you are face to face, that desire, those longings will be quenched forever. And do you know what else that you're going to feel when you come face to face with God? You will finally feel fully known. Do you ever feel misunderstood? Of course you do. We all do. Nobody makes it through this life without, at least on occasion, feeling like, hey, there are people that just don't get me. And the reason for that is because there are some people who don't care enough to get you. And at the same time, there's also the fact that there are parts of us that we prefer remain unknown. And so we're not completely understood. We're not completely known. But the day is coming in which you will spend an eternity in the presence of the one who has known you your entire life completely because he cares that much about you. The psalmist describes what being known like this really feels like, or how God knows this. He says this in Psalm chapter 139, verse 1 through 5. He says, "O Lord, you've examined my heart and know everything about me. You know when I sit down or stand up. You know my thoughts even when I'm far away. You see me when I travel and when I rest at home. You know everything I do. You know what I'm going to say even before I say it, Lord." This is how God knows us now. But the day is coming in which we will be with him in heaven and we'll understand this in a greater way than we understand it now. Now, once in heaven, will you think to yourself, well, Jesus, he just doesn't get me. You won't feel that way once. The moment you look into the eyes of Jesus, you'll feel gotten more than you have ever felt gotten before in your life. He completely understands who you are. There's just one last thing I want to share with you this morning. So when you come face to face with God, you are finally going to feel thoroughly loved. There's days right now when you feel loved, but there are also days when you don't feel loved. And there are days right now, or places right now where you feel love, and there are places that you enter into that you don't feel that loved. And to not feel loved, it's a dangerous feeling in so many ways. It's a hard feeling in so many ways. And really, again, feeling unknown and feeling unloved, it's behind so many of our decisions. When you feel unloved, it's often behind so many of our go-off-the-rail decisions in life, to be honest with you. Because you're just trying to get to something, to hold something, to feel something that you haven't been able to hold before, and you're searching for it in the wrong places. But it's not always going to be that way. You see, when you finally see God face to face, those feelings of being unloved or unwanted or unappreciated, those will be no more. From head to toe, you will feel God's love because this is who he is. And John reminds us of this in 1 John chapter 4 and verse 8. God is love. All of heaven will be full of love because God fills all of heaven. You will feel completely loved. So to wrap this up, I want to take you back to the Apostle Paul for just a moment. The Apostle Paul, as he grows older in life and he sees the end of life coming, he has this huge desire to just go to be with God. He knows that's where God is, where Christ is. He wants to be there more than anything else. But at the same time, he knows until God calls him home, he wants to be about God's work to make a difference in the world. And so he expresses this thought to the church at Philippi, in which he writes in Philippians chapter 1 and verse 22 through 25. "If I am to go on living in the body, this will mean fruitful labor for me. And yet what shall I choose? I do not know. I'm torn between the two. I desire to depart and be with Christ, which is better by far. But it is more necessary for you that I remain in the body. And convinced of this, I know that I will remain and I will continue with all of you for your progress and joy in the faith." I close with that scripture reading because I want us to walk away with this thought. May the promise of being with Christ in heaven one day inspire us and motivate us to be all about the work of God right now.